Welcome back to Werezilla's Retrospective. I'm your host, Werezilla. 10 years ago, I started doing videos about movies, TV shows, and games that are part of a larger series. Regardless of how inconsistent that schedule has become in recent years, one thing I've always tried to get out to you is an anniversary video where we delve into the world of the Transformers. Of course, I started in a bit of an odd place. When I reviewed Headmasters, the official English sub by Shout Factory didn't exist, which among other things meant that fewer people had much in the way of nostalgia when I reviewed it, or the rest of the Takara trilogy of shows. The same could not be said of Robots in Disguise. No, I'm talking about the 2001 version, and more significantly, the Unicron Trilogy. Pretty sure those three shows were very mainstream. Maybe not as much as the original cartoon or the Bayformers movies that came after, but still, those were the shows that many of you, my viewers, had watched as a kid, and thus those are the ones I started with. But while I was talking about shows that a lot of people remember growing up watching, Transformers was still going on all those years. There's now a whole generation of kids who grew up on things like Animated.
What do we got here?
Don't touch it!
Prime.
Bulkhead! I needed that!
And, yes, 2015's Robots in Disguise.
Hey! I needed that!
Naturally, the current generation's growing up watching Cyberverse and the Netflix trilogy. Hasbro really likes to sell Transformers using trilogies, don't they? Regardless, it's time we look at a more modern Transformers series for a change. Something even more modern than TV. Something viewers watch online. Something like...
They're gonna build?
Okay. Let's ease our way into this instead of jumping straight into the memes. First things first, why Hasbro greenlit the following three series? Well, like all their business decisions, it's primarily to sell toys. Specifically 3 year-long sublines as part of the larger Generations series. Combiner Wars, 3 guesses what this one focused on, Titan's Return, which invents the Headmaster idea for a modern audience while also giving us an even bigger toy for Fortress Maximus, before ending on Power of the Primes, with its focus on mixing the original 13 Transformers with Headmasters and Pretender gimmicks. If you were reading IDW's original continuity, then you might remember the first 2 lines were given tie-in storylines, which may not be the subject of today's video, but as we go through this, reading it probably would have helped understand certain characters and ideas. Or alternatively, you'll be even more confused due to a lack of context from the comics. The Prime Wars Trilogy does have a reputation for not being very good at explaining itself, or having very good animation, and not putting their voice actors' talents to good use. And to make matters worse, scheduling conflicts resulted in Combiner Wars being released after the toy line it was supposed to be promoting. Why does that sound familiar?
Well, I suppose I should bow my cab and say a few nice words. But who am I kidding?
Starting with Combiner Wars, taking place after the Autobot-Decepticon war is already over. Optimus Prime and Megatron have exiled themselves from their homeworld of Cybertron in order to maintain the peace, leaving Rodimus Prime, Starscream, and the Mistress of Flame to lead the Cybertronian race, making it confusing as to why the Combiners are still fighting each other. While this could be blamed on episodes of Combiner Wars being only 5 minutes compared to the 10 minutes of later 2 shows, it doesn't change the fact that the reason why the title characters are fighting each other and how this is a threat to everyone else is not explained. That's right, the central conflict of this first series is happening for no reason. I imagine we're supposed to fill in the blanks based on what happened in the IDW's Combiner Wars event, the fight on Caminus, Starscream's role in a post-war Cybertron council, and the Combiner creating MacGuffin, the Enigma of Combination, are all derived from the comic. But a lot of it is just thrown in with little context. Are the Combiners continuing the previous war without the other Autobots and Decepticons? Unlikely, since at one point Devastator rants at Megatron about how he feels like he was being used. Are they out of control because Combiners are typically treated as mentally unstable characters? No, that one definitely isn't the case. For one thing, the characters that form the component limbs and bodies are barely acknowledged, not even treated as proper characters, which happens to be my least favorite way of depicting Combiners. And as for their larger Combiner form, the ones the show bothers putting on screen, none of them seem particularly out of control. Is it part of a larger plot by Starscream to unite Cybertron and Kaminoz as it was in the comics? Nope! Starscream has different plans in this series. The Combiners fighting each other was just convenient for his plan. And then there's the equally vague enigma of combination. Rodimus, Starscream, and the Mistress can't seem to decide on whether or not it can create Combiners, or take control of existing Combiners, or even if the Combiners want to take the Enigma away from them, further muddying the waters as to why the Combiner Wars are even happening in the first place.
Combiners don't even know we have the Enigma.
The Council has the Enigma of Combination!
Which brings us to another factor into this series, its main character, Windblade.
Ah, the speaker who became the killer. Big fan of your work, do keep it up.
Arrogant relic! You have no idea who you're talking to.
I meant keep up the killing, not the speaking. That doesn't suit you.
Where to start with Windblade? Being the first character that was designed using feedback from an online fan poll, the fan-built bot, in celebration of Transformers' 30th anniversary, means she will always remain a divisive figure. There's also the fact that she's the star of a 2016 series, after the rise of the anti-SJW YouTuber that loves to spend their days complaining about Rey and Captain Marvel. Fortunately, these folks don't seem to care about Transformers much, so I doubt we'll be getting any, Windblade's a Mary Sue, has for pushing SJW and garbage anytime soon. Okay, they might be tempted, seeing her easily beat Menasor, but later in Titan's Return, Megatron is able to fight 4 Combiners at the same time and win. Trust me, Windblade isn't overpowered. The Combiners are underpowered. As for people who are more familiar with Windblade, the decision to make her a more vengeful character than usual in this series is still a controversial decision. A friend of hers ends up the only on-screen casualty of the Combiner Wars, resulting in her wanting revenge on all of them, aiming to destroy the Enigma. Of course, the unclear nature of the Enigma, or the Combiner Wars conflict, makes it unclear if Windblade thinks this will prevent more Combiners from coming into existence, or if this will somehow kill off all the Combiners. Is anyone else beginning to see just how appropriately named the Enigma of Combination is? Everything around it just leads to more questions. Combiner Wars, however, is not appropriately named, as you can probably tell based on what I've described so far. This is more of a disagreement about what to do about the Enigma between the 6 principal characters, rather than a war fought between Combiners. They're incidental to the real threat. And that threat is... Yeah, whether it's the Underbase in the Marvel comics, the Cyber Planet Keys in Cybertron, the Enigma of Combination here in Combiner Wars, or the Allspark in Cyberverse, it seems Starscream's destiny is to gain some kind of cosmic power, forcing everyone to team up to deal with him. Typical Starscream to be sure, but before this moment, Starscream had spent the entirety of Combiner Wars wanting to atone for his past actions. Actions not described in great detail to the audience, but this being Starscream, after all, we can guess it involved attempting to overthrow Megatron. I guess if you're looking for a morally conflicted Starscream, you'll just have to stick with Armada, as Combiner Wars pulls a 180 and abandons this idea for a more predictable outcome. Which ends up affecting Windblade's character, but not positively. Rather than getting over her need for revenge on the Combiners, she's contacted by Metroplex, who asks her to be more like her old self. After which, Windblade's first order to Metroplex is...
Crush him.
Which I guess was the catharsis Windblade needed, as she's now over her need for revenge after this. I guess. Even giving the Enigma to the Combiners. The newest Combiner character made for this series, Victorion, who, like Windblade, was made using fan feedback, takes it as if it was the Combiner version of the Matrix of Leadership. And then all leave peacefully at the end of the series together, their own unexplained conflict unresolved. What?
I'm sure someone will do something, and this will all work itself out somehow.
As for the rest of the main cast, well, I'll talk more about Rodimus in Titan's Return. And the Mistress of Flame is a piece of cardboard, there's really nothing to say about her, so I guess we better jump to Optimus Prime and Megatron. Despite being played by the honest trailers guy, John Bailey, Optimus is more or less played straight. A war-weary character who's accepted that peace between the Autobots and Decepticons, it came at the cost of his own personal peace. Apparently he couldn't bring himself to kill Megatron when the war ended, and it's haunted him ever since. In fact, far more humor comes from Megatron, who is easily the best character in the whole Prime Wars Trilogy.
What was that you always used to say, Prime? Oh, that's right. Transform and roll out. So, what say we just go in, kill everyone in the council, destroy the Enigma, and call it a day?
No, we are here to reason with them.
Oh, I love this plan. In no way will it end in bloodshed and tears.
Although handled differently than IDW's post-war Megatron, this series also depicts him as one of the show's protagonists, rather than as its main villain. Here, he's a deposed tyrant who deflects from his defeat with humor, rubbing it in the other character's face that the peace they fought for wasn't as great as they expected it to be. Given how poorly Rodimus and the Mistress were able to handle their off-screen combiner problem, and not to mention how fast things go to shit in Titan's Return, he might have been onto something. I freely admit this had the potential to make Megatron an annoying character, but I'd say his voice actor Jason Marnocha is charismatic enough to pull this off. There's a reason he stuck around not only for this whole trilogy, but is also playing Megatron in the Netflix series. While a lot of it could be blamed on how everyone who isn't Megatron is written with boring, often contradictory dialogue, especially scenes involving the Council and the Enigma, the voice acting is really nothing to write home about. The combiners probably suffer from this the worst. You know where this is going. You've been waiting for this for years. You want me to show you this scene in its full context. Well, here it is. In the quintessential example of the series' poor writing and voice acting combining into something that quickly became a meme, we have the scene where, after Windblade has mortally wounded Menasor, he threatens her with how the combiner threat isn't over, and that her thirst for revenge is all for nothing. All because the Council has the Enigma. Which means...
They're gonna build an army of combiners!
Now, I've already mentioned Jason Marnocha, who plays Megatron. He and Abby Trott, who voices Windblade, are professional voice actors. The latter you might remember from Persona 5 Royal. Other members of the cast are also real voice actors, while Optimus is voiced by John Bailey, who is both a professional voice actor as well as a YouTuber. I remember I was first introduced to him through his channel back in the early 2000s when he was making Transformers Unsolved Mysteries, hosted by Ultra Magnus, because actor illusions are fun. Menasor, however, is voiced by Dashi Games, who is only a YouTuber, and it shows. And since we know Menasor's threat was ultimately empty, as the plot couldn't decide what the Council wanted to do with the Enigma, or what it even does, Menasor has unintentionally become the mascot for Combiner Wars, a testament to how lackluster it ended up being. Of course, there is one last thing we need to touch on, something I've been dancing around, and yet it's been staring you right in the face since I started showing footage from this series. It's animation time, people. This will be a bigger problem in Titan's Return, but before I get into any of that, let me start by saying the animation models look great. I like the battle damage added to Optimus and Megatron, and while Rodimus's proportions are off, that's the fault of the toy, not the show. It's pretty funny seeing the blockier characters standing side by side with the more streamlined designs of Windblade and the Mistress of Flame. You can definitely tell which ones were originally designed in the 80s and which ones are more modern characters. That said, these models move around in a very sluggish way. The show has a distractingly slow frame rate, resulting in slow fight scenes that look like we just walked in on the characters choreographing the scene before principal photography, which makes no sense for animated characters to do, but whatever, I needed an analogy and this was the first thing that came to mind. And not only are the fights slow, but the sluggish animation also draws out scenes longer than necessary. Check out Rodimus's slow reaction time, for example.
I can have Wheeljack. Starscream!
But as mediocre as this may come across, it's actually tame compared to what came next. Things start to escalate, both in terms of stakes and issues with the series, in Titan's Return. And like its predecessor, Titan's Return also had scheduling problems, resulting in the series being released towards the end of the toy line's run. At least the toy line it was supposed to be promoting was on the shelves. That's progress. Kind of.
The Transformers will return after these messages.
Next time on Werezilla's Retrospective. Oh dear, that stiff movement, that repetitive animation, that total lack of impact in their attacks. Sweet Vector Sigma.
This battle is not like the ones you and I have always fought. No kidding.